Think for a moment about a quality we almost universally admire. It doesn't matter where you're from or what era you live. In courage resonates right.
Definitely.
It's that thing that makes you stop and think. And if you're anything like me, you've wondered, what is it at its core that makes someone truly courageous? What's the real story behind it?
That fundamental human drive to understand courage more deeply is exactly what we're exploring today. Consider this our deep dive into the very heart of courage.
Okay.
We'll be looking at, where it comes from, how it shapes our lives and societies, and even how different ways of thinking try to make sense of it.
Absolutely. And this isn't just a casual chat. We've got a fascinating collection of sources here. Ideas from philosophical giants like Plato and Aristotle, modern psychological frameworks that dissect fear.
Yeah, the science angle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Compelling historical instances of bravery, and even some intriguing perspectives on how artificial intelligence might, well, process the idea of courage.
Our goal today is to navigate through all this rich information and pull out the most vital insights. We want to give you, our listener, a direct route to understanding this complex and universally valued aspect of being human without getting lost in, unnecessary complexity.
Okay, so let's get right into it. What is courage, really? It feels like we know it when we see it, but when you try to pin it down, it gets surprisingly intricate.
It certainly does. Philosophers have been pondering this for thousands of years. If we look back to ancient Greece, Plato viewed courage as a form of mental toughness, like a clear understanding of what's truly frightening and what isn't,
Okay.
combined with a firm commitment to the beliefs instilled by law and education. Think of it as a disciplined adherence to what you know to be right.
Almost like a well-developed resilience, then. Or sticking to your guns.
Very much so. Then Aristotle comes along, and he famously described courage as finding the balance point, right? The sweet spot between feeling too much fear that's cowardice and not enough, which is recklessness.
The golden mean, yeah.
Exactly. And for Aristotle, the clearest example of this balanced courage was seen in soldiers fighting for a meaningful cause. That element of a worthy aim suggests courage isn't just about blind action.
It's purposeful bravery. And the Romans, they had their concept of virtus, which, again, put a strong emphasis on courage as a fundamental part of being a good and capable person.
Precisely. Moving through history, medieval thinkers like Thomas Aquinas approached courage through a religious lens, seeing it as fortitude.
46.
One of the key virtues that gives us the inner strength to face even the gravest dangers.
So perhaps less about winning battles and more about inner resolve during tough times, or maybe both.
It encompasses both, really. It's about a steadfastness of mind. Then when we reach more modern philosophers, you have Hobbes emphasizing courage for self-preservation.
Right.
Kierkegaard contrasting it with the feeling of anxiety, and Tillich with his powerful concept of the courage to be, that fundamental bravery to embrace existence authentically.
That idea of the courage to be always felt so foundational, just the sheer bravery to live as your true self,
Indeed. And C.S. Lewis offers this really insightful thought. He said, courage is not simply one of the virtues, but the form of every virtue at the testing point.
Wow.
Think about that for a moment when things get really challenging. It's courage that allows us to act on any other virtue we might hold, like honesty or kindness.
That's a powerful way to frame it. It's like the engine for everything else. So that's the philosophical angle. What does psychology tell us about courage? Does it line up?
Psychology tends to look at courage in more practical terms, maybe more measurable ways. Rockman's model, for instance, suggests that courage involves a separation, a decoupling of the different parts of our fear response.
Okay, how does that work?
So you might still feel the physical sensations of fear, your heart pounding, maybe sweating, but a courageous person can consciously choose not to let those feelings dictate their actions. They resist the urge to back down and face the situation.
So it's not about a lack of fear, but about acting despite it. That seems to be a recurring theme.
Exactly. And positive psychology views courage as a core character strength, something that's linked to qualities like perseverance, integrity, and acting in accordance with your values even when it's difficult.
Right.
Which ultimately contributes to your overall sense of well-being.
That resonates. It feels good in a way to act in line with what you believe is right, even if it's scary at the time.
And our everyday understanding of courage, what psychologists call implicit theories, often highlights that it's a deliberate action, something we think about, that involves real risk, and that's aimed at achieving something good or worthwhile.
Okay, so we're seeing some consistent ideas emerging. Purpose, risk, acting despite fear. What about different cultures? Does the concept of courage vary much around the world?
Well, while the specific ways courage is expressed can certainly differ, the admiration for it seems to be quite universal. Consider Eastern philosophies. The Tao Te Ching, for example, suggests that true courage actually originates from love and compassion.
That's a beautiful thought that a deep care for something or someone can make you incredibly brave.
It is. And in Hindu scriptures, you find concepts like Shaurya and Dairya, which translate roughly to valor and fortitude, listed as essential aspects of dharma, or, righteous living.
Mm.
We also see interesting cultural nuances. In Germany, there's a strong emphasis on Zivilcourage, or civil courage, the everyday bravery of ordinary citizens to stand up for societal and democratic principles.
Okay, so like intervening if you see something wrong happening.
Exactly. Which is related to, but maybe not exactly the same as, how we often think of moral courage in the US and UK,
Yeah.
which sometimes focuses more on individual ethical stances or the actions of prominent figures.
Right, like whistleblowing or a politician taking a stand.
Yeah, civil courage might be more about that immediate on-the-street intervention, whereas the US-UK idea might lean towards those bigger, perhaps more individualistic moral stance.
So the context really shapes how courage is understood and expressed, but sounds like there's a fundamental agreement on what it means at its core.
Precisely. That core idea that runs through all these different perspectives is the notion of acting despite fear, driven by a higher purpose or set of values. It's not about the absence of fear.
Like Mark Twain said.
Exactly, as Mark Twain so eloquently put it, courage is resilience to fear, mastery of fear, not absence of fear. It's that active choice to move forward even when you're afraid that truly defines courage.
We even have a helpful overview in our sources, like a table, that visually brings together all these different ways of thinking about courage. It really shows how multi-layered this concept is.
Yeah, that's useful. What's so interesting is how these diverse definitions, whether they come from philosophy, psychology, or different cultural traditions, all circle back to this central tension, the internal experience of fear and the external act of proceeding anyway.
Okay, so we've got this broad understanding of courage. Now let's look at the different kinds of courage. It's not just about those big dramatic acts of heroism, is it, like running into a burning building?
Not at all. While physical courage, facing the possibility of bodily harm or danger, is often the first thing that comes to mind, yeah, like you said, running into a fire, soldiers in combat.
There are many other equally important forms.
Boy.
Consider moral courage. Standing up for your ethical principles, even when it's unpopular or carries significant social risks, like someone blowing the whistle on illegal activities at work.
That takes a different kind of strength, right? The strength to face social repercussions, maybe losing your job, rather than physical threats.
Exactly. Then there's intellectual courage. The willingness to question your own deeply held beliefs, to explore ideas that might be unsettling or challenge your worldview.
Ooh, that's a tough one.
It can be. Think of a scientist who proposes a groundbreaking theory that goes against the established scientific consensus. Galileo, maybe?
That can be really difficult, admitting you might be wrong or facing criticism, even ridicule for your ideas. Absolutely. Emotional courage is another crucial type. Facing your inner fears, expressing your feelings honestly, perhaps engaging in the difficult process of therapy. That's about allowing yourself to be vulnerable.
Which, ironically, often takes a tremendous amount of bravery. People often see vulnerability as weakness, but it's really not.
It absolutely isn't. And then we have social courage, taking interpersonal risks in relationships, perhaps standing up to bullying or simply being authentic in social situations, even if it means going against the grain.
Just being yourself, yeah.
And finally, existential courage, confronting those fundamental anxieties about life, death, and meaning, and making a conscious choice to live authentically despite these inherent uncertainties. Tillich's idea of the courage to be really captures this profound form of bravery.
So it's this whole spectrum from the outwardly heroic to these quieter, more internal struggles, like deciding to change careers late in life or ending a bad relationship.
What's fascinating is that while these different types of courage involve different kinds of fear of physical harm, social rejection, cognitive dissonance, vulnerability, existential dread, they often share underlying mechanisms.
Okay.
Things like assessing potential dangers, managing the feeling of fear, and acting purposefully towards something you value. But the specific triggers of fear and the nature of those valued goals are what make each type distinct.
Okay, so courage isn't the absence of fear, but it's how we respond to it. Let's dive into that relationship between courage and fear. It sounds like it's more of a dynamic interplay than a simple battle,
That's a very insightful way to put it. Like dancing, maybe? As Twain said, it's about mastery, not absence. And to understand that mastery, we need to touch on what happens in our brains when we experience fear.
The neurobiology did.
Right. We know that a small almond-shaped region called the amygdala plays a key role in detecting potential threats and triggering our body's fight-or-flight response. It's like the brain's alarm system.
Got it.
Then other parts of the brain, like the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex, the more thinking parts step in to try to make sense of those threats and understand the context of that situation.
So it's like the more analytical parts of our brain trying to evaluate the initial alarm signal. Like, is this really a threat?
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
And what we understand about courage from a neurological perspective suggests that it involves an active process of regulating that initial fear response. Research indicates that the orbitofrontal cortex, or OFC,
Okay.
which we could think of as a kind of decision-making hub located at the front of the brain, plays a role in weighing the signals coming from the fear center in the amygdala against input from the frontal lobes, which are involved in reasoning, goal setting, and holding our beliefs.
So it's like weighing the fear against the goal.
Pretty much. Additionally, areas like the anterior cingulate gyrus, ACG, and the right temporal pole, RTP, are thought to help calm down the amygdala, allowing the more rational frontal lobes to have a greater influence.
So it's like our brain is actively choosing to prioritize a particular course of action over the feeling of fear, putting the brakes on the amygdala, maybe?
Precisely. It's about enabling the frontal lobe, the more reasoned part of your brain, to exert more control. This highlights that courage isn't just a feeling, it's also a cognitive skill, an executive function that allows us to override that more primitive fear response.
Right.
And the exciting implication here is that, like other executive functions, courage might actually be something we can develop and strengthen over time through repeated experiences of acting courageously. It's like a muscle.
That's an empowering thought. It's not just something you're born with or not. And you mentioned the importance of context earlier. How does that fit into this neurological picture?
Context is absolutely vital. Our prefrontal cortex and hippocampus are constantly evaluating the situation we're in. Seeing a lion in its natural habitat is likely to trigger a strong fear response.
Obviously.
But seeing the same lion safely enclosed in a zoo typically evokes curiosity instead. That contextual assessment is a crucial cognitive ability. So if courage involves acting despite fear, then being able to accurately assess whether a situation truly warrants a fear response is a key part of being courageous, and this connects directly to intellectual courage, being willing to critically examine potential threats and overcome biases in our perceptions.
That makes perfect sense. You need to know if the fear is justified. And I was interested to learn that fear itself can sometimes actually motivate courageous behavior. How does that work?
It can indeed. Think about the fear of shame or dishonor, or maybe the fear of letting someone down. In some situations, that fear of negative social consequences can actually push us to do something physically courageous that we might otherwise avoid. It really illustrates just how intricate this relationship is. Fear can be both the obstacle we need to overcome and, paradoxically, the very thing that propels us toward courageous action.
Wow. Okay. Now, our listener today had this really interesting idea about the fundamental origins of courage, linking it to the basic human drives to seize pain and make their lives longer, and how this might have fundamentally changed the course of life. What do our sources suggest about these primal roots? Where did this all start?
That's a very thought-provoking idea. When we consider our evolutionary history, there's definitely evidence to suggest a connection between behaviors that we might now recognize as courageous and the survival of early humans.
Okay.
Imagine early hominins encountering predators. Actions like making loud warning calls or even aggressive displays, even if they carried some personal risk, could deter attackers and increase the chances of survival for both the individual and the group. This is often referred to as aposematic behavior, signaling danger to a potential threat.
So kind of brave posturing, making yourself look bigger or scarier.
Exactly. And there's also the concept of the battle trance, a kind of altered state of consciousness that might have occurred during collective activities like hunting or defending against threats.
The battle trance.
Yeah, where individuals experienced a temporary reduction in fear and even pain sensitivity, like analgesia. This would have provided a significant advantage in those high-stakes situations. A phobia, they sometimes call it lack of fear.
It's like our bodies and minds working together to override immediate dangers. Adrenaline rush, maybe?
Precisely. Something like that. Furthermore, population genetic models suggest that traits like a certain level of aggression or belligerence and bravery in males might have evolved together due to competition for resources such as mates and territory.
Right, competition driving evolution.
Exactly. While these traits could be risky for the individual, they could also enhance the success of the group, indirectly contributing to the longer lives of its members by securing better access to essential resources.
So even something like aggression in a specific evolutionary context might have a survival benefit linked to bravery. That's interesting.
It appears so in certain contexts. And then we have the concept of altruism and group selection. Courageous acts like giving a warning call when a predator is near, even if it puts the caller at greater risk.
The meerkat standing guard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That can significantly improve the survival chances of the entire group. So the origins of courage aren't solely about individual self-preservation. They're also deeply intertwined with the survival and well-being of the social group.
Our listener also mentioned seizing pain. How might that relate to these early forms of courage? Did early humans just ignore pain?
Well, the fundamental drive to avoid pain is certainly a powerful one. However, courage often involves facing pain or the potential for pain in pursuit of a greater objective. Think about early humans enduring physical hardship during long migrations or challenging hunts.
Yeah, that couldn't have been comfortable.
Not at all. That willingness to push through discomfort and the risk of injury would have been crucial for survival and, in a sense, making lives longer for the group by finding new territories or more abundant food sources. And we see echoes of this today in our efforts to extend lifespan and improve quality of life through medicine and technology. We are constantly striving to overcome pain, aging, and mortality.
So that initial idea about seizing pain does seem to have some basis in our evolutionary past. It's about enduring necessary hardship for a greater goal. What about the suggestion that courage altered the order of life itself? That sounds pretty dramatic.
That's a very compelling way to think about it, and there's substantial support for that perspective.
Yeah.
By enabling early humans to take calculated risks for exploration of new environments, for hunting more formidable prey, for undertaking migrations, for establishing complex social structures, courage was instrumental in our ability to move beyond simply reacting to our immediate surroundings.
So we stopped just responding and started shaping things.
We began to proactively shape our world. Instead of just trying to survive day to day, we started to thrive and actively change our environment. Exactly. That transition from a reactive to a proactive existence, driven in part by these courageous actions, represents a fundamental shift in the human story. If these courageous behaviors consistently led to better survival rates, higher social status, and greater access to resources for those who exhibited them, it would have created a positive feedback loop, reinforcing both the biological and cultural transmission of those courageous tendencies. It literally changed how humans lived.
It's fascinating to see how this is unfolded throughout human history. How have different civilizations and eras viewed and valued courage? Did it always look the same?
The way courage has been expressed and valued has certainly evolved alongside our societies. In ancient Greece, as we touched on earlier, martial courage was highly esteemed, essential for defending the city-state, the poleis. Think of the heroic figures in the Iliad, right?
Achilles, Hector, yeah.
But even then, there was also an appreciation for philosophical courage, exemplified by figures like Socrates who faced death rather than renounce his beliefs.
So both bravery on the battlefield and standing firm in your convictions were highly valued. Different kinds of courage, even back then.
Precisely. Ancient Rome built much of its identity and its imperial ambitions on the concept of virtus, which included courage as a central and defining characteristic, alongside qualities like manliness and excellence. The disciplined and courageous Roman soldier became a powerful symbol of this ideal.
And in medieval Europe, with the emergence of chivalry, courage became closely linked to notions of honor and duty, didn't it? Knights and stuff.
Absolutely. Knights were expected to prioritize their honor even above their own lives, reflected in the epic tales of the era. At the same time, theological thinkers were engaging in deep reflection on the true meaning of bravery, often drawing distinctions between virtuous courage and, well, reckless abandon.
Making sure it wasn't just mindless fighting. What about in Eastern traditions? We mentioned the Tao Te Ching.
Right. They offer some really interesting and nuanced perspectives. The Tao Te Ching connects courage to love. In Hindu philosophy, valor, shaurya, and fortitude, dharya, are seen as integral to dharma, righteous living. Islamic beliefs place emphasis on self-control and courage in the face of adversity, and Confucian ethics stresses the importance of balancing courage, young, with righteousness and propriety, Li, in order to be truly virtuous.
So there's this recurring theme that courage isn't just about a lack of fear. It needs to be guided by something larger, whether it's love, duty, righteousness, or a strong sense of what is right.
Exactly. And when we move into the modern era, we see the emergence of new forms of courage that reflect the changing social and political landscape. In Germany, the concept of civil courage, the bravery of ordinary citizens to uphold democratic norms and intervene against injustice, is a significant development.
Real courage, yeah.
And in Anglo-American contexts, we often discuss moral courage in individuals who take a stand based on their principles, even when facing opposition. The 20th and 21st centuries are replete with examples of courage in social movements.
Oh, absolutely.
From Gandhi to Rosa Parks, to the iconic image of the tank man individuals and groups who undertook enormous personal risks to challenge injustice and advocate for change. Fichquanguco, Corazon Aquino. The list goes on.
It really highlights how the worthy aim or the noble cause that motivates courage isn't static. It's shaped by our evolving social and political structures, our cultural values, and our deeply held belief systems.
Precisely. And these historical narratives of courage serve a really important function. They aren't just stories from the past. They teach us what a society values. They help shape our collective identity, and they provide us with models, maybe inspiration, for how to act bravely in the face of adversity.
So while the underlying capacity for courage might be a fundamental human trait, the way it's expressed and what we recognize as courageous is very much influenced by our history and culture. It changes over time.
Absolutely. It's a constant interplay between our innate potential and the world around us.
That naturally leads us to consider the biological and genetic factors that might contribute to courage. We've touched on the brain's role, the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex. But what about our genes? Is there a courage gene? Can you inherit bravery?
That's a question that often comes up, and the straightforward answer is no. There isn't a single gene that determines courage. It's much more complex than that.
Figured. It never seems to be just one gene.
Right. However, there are certainly biological and genetic factors that contribute to our individual capacities for courage. As we discussed, the neurobiological mechanisms in the brain, that intricate interplay between areas like the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, the OFC, the ACG, the RTP, provide the fundamental physiological substrate, the hardware, for how we process fear and make decisions about how to act.
Okay.
Individual differences in the structure and function of these brain regions, which can be influenced by our genetic makeup, could certainly play a role in variations in our baseline tendencies towards fear and courageous behavior.
So it's possible that some people might be naturally predisposed to being a bit more bold or maybe a bit more anxious?
There's likely a genetic component to how sensitive our fear response system is and how effectively our brains can regulate that response. Studies looking at risk-taking behavior, which is closely related to courage, suggest a heritable aspect. But it's what we call polygenic, meaning it involves the interaction of many different genes, each with a relatively small effect. One gene that's sometimes mentioned in this context is the DRD4 gene, specifically the 7-repeat allele variant, which has been linked to novelty-seeking behavior.
Right, I've heard of that one.
But it's just one small piece of a very complex puzzle. Even more significant are the complex interactions between our genes and our gene-environment interactions.
The classic nature-nurture.
Exactly. Our early life experiences, our upbringing, what we learn throughout our lives, all have a profound impact on our individual propensities for risk-taking and courageous action. Evolutionary genetic models also explore how certain behavioral tendencies, including those related to bravery and even belligerence, might have evolved in early human groups, suggesting that certain genetic predispositions might have been favored over time because they contributed to the survival and success of the group, even if they sometimes pose risks to the individual. There's even some suggestion of paternal genetic control influencing these traits. Interesting. And we also know that certain personality traits, which have a genetic component, tend to correlate with expressions of courage. For example, individuals who score higher on extroversion, conscientiousness, and openness to experience often show higher levels of courage, while those who score higher on neuroticism tend to exhibit less courage. This suggests that our underlying temperament plays a role.
But it's not predetermined, right? Just because someone might have a genetic inclination doesn't mean they're locked into being either fearless or cowardly. You can still choose.
Absolutely not.
Right.
It's a complex interplay of multiple genetic factors influencing fear processing and temperament, combined with a lifetime of environmental inputs that shape and modify those initial predispositions. Our learning experiences, our successes and failures in challenging situations, the development of our coping mechanisms, they all play crucial roles. This complexity is why the idea of a simple genetic intervention to enhance courage is not only unrealistic, but also raises significant ethical questions.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to just flip a bravery switch. It's amazing how all these different pieces, the philosophical ideas, the psychological models, the historical accounts, and now the biology, all contribute to this larger, more nuanced understanding of what courage truly is.
And we've only scratched the surface. Wait until we explore how our understanding and expression of courage evolves as we move through different stages of life.
Right, how kids see it versus adults.
And how it's perceived and expressed differently across genders. That adds yet another fascinating layer to the discussion.
Oh, I'm definitely eager to hear more. Let's delve into that next. How does our understanding and demonstration of courage change as we grow up? Is a kid's idea of courage different from an adult's?
It changes quite a bit, yeah. In early childhood, young children often equate courage with simply not being afraid and doing physically daring things like jumping off something high.
Yeah, fearlessness.
Exactly. But as they mature, their understanding becomes more sophisticated. They begin to recognize that courage isn't about the absence of fear, but rather about acting in the face of it. And they start to appreciate that there are also psychological, social, and even moral risks that require bravery.
So it develops beyond just physical daring as we get older. They start seeing the nuances.
Exactly. Adolescence is a particularly significant period for the development of courage. It's a time when individuals are striving for greater independence and forming their identities.
Big changes then.
Huge. Courage becomes essential for taking positive risks, trying new activities, forming new relationships, expressing their own opinions, standing up for friends, all of which are vital for developing a sense of self and autonomy.
Things that can feel really scary at that age.
Absolutely. And interestingly, research suggests that supportive parenting, where adolescents feel secure and are encouraged to be independent and explore, actually predicts higher levels of courage later in life.
That makes intuitive sense. If you feel like you have a secure base, you're probably more willing to venture out and take risks.
Precisely. This might be because it fosters self-esteem and the development of effective emotional regulation skills, knowing you can handle difficult feelings. One study even found that supportive parenting during elementary school was a significant predictor of moral courage in girls during high school.
Oh, interesting.
Although this wasn't the case for boys in that particular study, which suggests that there might be some gender-specific influences at play in how courage develops, or maybe how it's encouraged. Adolescents themselves, though, tend to have a fairly broad understanding of courage, recognizing bravery in both moral and physical domains.
That's interesting. And you mentioned gender. How do societal expectations and norms influence how we perceive and understand courage in men and women? This feels like a big one.
This is a really important area to consider. Historically, and even in many ways today, traditional Western cultures have often portrayed courage as a predominantly masculine trait, frequently associated with physical bravery in contexts like warfare or other overtly dangerous situations.
The stereotypical hero.
Right. This has often meant that the courageous actions of women, particularly those that are not as outwardly dramatic or that occur in more private spheres, have been overlooked or undervalued. Think about the immense bravery often required of immigrants starting new lives in unfamiliar surroundings, of indigenous women defending their cultures and traditions in the face of adversity, or of single mothers overcoming significant hardships to provide for their families. These are all acts that require tremendous fortitude, but might not always fit the stereotypical image of heroic courage.
So there's a potential bias in what we typically recognize as courageous. We miss a lot of it.
Absolutely. Social role theory suggests that from a young age, males and females are often socialized differently, learning and being rewarded for different types of behaviors. Boys might be more encouraged to be assertive and physically brave, while girls might be socialized more towards nurturing and relational behaviors. This differential socialization can influence both how courage is expressed and what kinds of actions are more readily recognized as courageous. Research, like studies from the Pew Research Center, has even shown that traits like strength and ambition are often more highly valued in men, while traits like compassion and responsibility are often more valued in women.
Wow.
And the very perception of what constitutes being powerful can differ significantly across genders.
That's a powerful illustration of how societal perceptions can shape our understanding of courage and maybe even limit it.
It is. But there are also important perspectives that highlight uniquely feminine forms of courage. For example, the act of childbearing itself involves significant physical risks and emotional endurance, and could certainly be viewed as an act of profound courage.
Definitely.
Similarly, women navigating difficult or non-traditional pregnancies or facing societal stigma related to their reproductive choices can demonstrate remarkable fortitude. Research by Marvasti, for instance, found that when asked to recount stories of courage, male students might more readily describe instances of dramatic physical bravery, while female students' narratives might more often focus on sustained emotional resilience and providing support to others through challenging times, a different kind of endurance.
So our social environment and these deeply ingrained gender norms really act as a filter through which we understand and express courage. And they can unfortunately limit both its expression and our broader societal appreciation of its many forms. It narrows the definition.
Exactly. It's a sociocognitive process, shaped by the world around us and often viewed through the lens of gender, which can sometimes lead to a rather narrow definition of what courage truly looks like.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. We've talked a lot about the individual, how courage feels, how it develops. What about the impact on the individual? What does being courageous do for someone's well-being, their resilience, their path in life?
That's a great question. There's a strong link between acting courageously and psychological well-being. Engaging in courageous acts, especially those aligned with your values, can lead to lower levels of anxiety and a greater sense of life satisfaction. It acts as a kind of psychological resource, helping us cope with challenges more effectively.
So it builds you up, in a way.
Exactly. There's a very close association between courage and resilience. Each time you act bravely, even in small ways, you're essentially building your capacity to handle future difficulties. It fosters a sense of self-efficacy, the belief that you can actually manage challenging situations.
Like practice makes perfect, or at least makes you stronger.
Precisely. Courage is also a key motivator for personal growth and authenticity. It's what enables us to step outside our comfort zones, pursue meaningful goals, and live a life that feels true to ourselves, even when that path involves uncertainty or potential disapproval from others.
Taking that leap.
Yes, and intellectual courage specifically is linked to more effective decision-making because it helps us overcome cognitive biases and confront uncomfortable truths. Then there's this concept of hardiness.
Hardiness.
Yeah, developed by psychologist Suzanne Kobasa. It involves three components. Commitment, being involved in life. Control, believing you can influence outcomes. And challenge, viewing difficulties as opportunities for growth. Hardiness is seen as a kind of operationalization of existential courage, and it's strongly linked to better performance and well-being, especially under stress.
Commitment, control, challenge. Got it.
And in leadership contexts, we talk about psychological bravery. The willingness to take calculated risks, make principled decisions even when they're unpopular, and maintain integrity under pressure.
So there's a causal chain here.
It seems so. Courage enables action aligned with values despite fear. This action leads to growth, a stronger sense of self-efficacy, increased resilience, and ultimately greater well-being and a more meaningful life. And often overlooked is the courage to be vulnerable.
We touched on that with emotional courage.
Right. That willingness to show up authentically, flaws and all, is actually foundational for building trust, fostering genuine connections, and even for authentic leadership. It takes guts to be vulnerable.
Absolutely. So acting courageously isn't just about achieving an external goal. It profoundly shapes who we are and how we experience life.
Definitely. It's integral to flourishing.
It's clear that courage is vital for individual well-being, but how does it function at a collective level? How does it contribute to social change and the upholding of justice? We talked about historical examples.
Moral courage is absolutely fundamental to the health and functioning of a community. It's what motivates individuals to stand up for societal norms and democratic values, particularly when those norms are being challenged or violated. These can range from everyday acts of integrity, calling out prejudice, refusing to go along with something unethical,
Right.
to larger-scale interventions aimed at protecting the fundamental principles of a just society. Think of individuals who witness wrongdoing and choose to speak out, even at personal risk.
Assault blowers, activists.
Precisely. And history is filled with pivotal moments where the courage of individuals and groups has been the catalyst for significant social change. The Salt March, led by Gandhi, Rosa Parks' active defiance on the bus, the incredibly brave stance of the Tank Man in Tiananmen Square, Emily Davison fighting for suffrage, Tommy Smith and John Carlos at the Olympics.
Iconic moment.
Yes, these were all acts of immense bravery that inspired others and fundamentally altered the course of events. There's even a concept of moral contagion, where one courageous act can embolden others to act similarly, creating a ripple effect. It spreads.
It's like a spark that ignites a larger movement. And you also mentioned intellectual courage playing a role in societal transformation earlier, particularly in science.
Absolutely. Consider the major scientific paradigm shifts throughout history, as described by thinkers like Thomas Kuhn. Significant scientific advancements often require individuals to challenge long-held beliefs and propose entirely new ways of understanding the world.
The status quo.
And this takes immense intellectual courage. Think of Copernicus challenging the geocentric view of the universe, or Darwin proposing the theory of evolution. They faced significant resistance, even persecution, for their groundbreaking ideas.
It takes a certain kind of bravery to go against the established way of thinking, especially when everyone else thinks you're wrong.
It does. And the political philosopher Hannah Arendt had a particularly insightful view on the political significance of courage. She argued that in the public sphere, where we interact with others and take responsibility for our shared world, courage is an essential virtue. It's not just about protecting one's own life, she said, but about caring for the world itself. Not life, but the world is at stake. It's the courage to enter the public sphere and take responsibility for that shared world.
So courage is essential for a healthy society, for progress, and for safeguarding our fundamental values. Without it, things stagnate or go backward.
Precisely. Societal progress often hinges on the courage of individuals and groups to challenge the status quo, whether it involves unjust laws, oppressive systems, or outdated scientific paradigms. A society that doesn't allow for or even actively suppresses courageous dissent risks stagnation and the perpetuation of injustice. The impact of collective courage can be far greater than the sum of individual acts because of that power of inspiration and the network effects, the creation of new possibilities when people act together in pursuit of a common goal.
So courage doesn't just benefit the individual, it really benefits all of us in the long run. It pushes humanity forward.
Absolutely. It's been a fundamental driver of human progress and the development of more just and equitable societies throughout history.
Our listener raised an interesting point about courage potentially having altered the order of life itself and generally being beneficial for the most part. Who specifically benefits from courageous actions? Is it always a positive force? Or are there downsides?
That's a very insightful question that gets to the core of the impact of courage. We've already discussed the benefits for the individual: increased psychological well-being, greater resilience, opportunities for personal growth, a stronger sense of meaning and purpose. Even Aristotle believed that courageous action, when directed towards noble ends and achieved successfully, brings its own kind of inherent satisfaction or pleasure.
The feeling of acting in accordance with your values, even when it's difficult. Doing the right thing feels good eventually.
Exactly. But the benefits extend far beyond the individual. For early human societies, as we discussed, physical courage in defense and in acquiring essential resources was crucial for the survival of the entire group.
Right, keeping the group safe and fed.
In more complex societies, moral courage is vital for maintaining justice and upholding democratic principles. Acts of heroism directly save lives. And intellectual and social courage are key drivers of scientific discovery and societal progress, social revolutions.
So it creates kind of ripple effect of positive outcomes for the group, for society.
It does. You could even argue, as we touched on, that courage has been a key factor in humanity's transition from a primarily reactive existence to a more proactive one, allowing us to shape our environment and develop intricate social and cultural systems, essentially creating what some thinkers describe as a new nature as a cultural sphere. We remake the world.
But who benefits most? Is it always clear who the beneficiaries are? Does the courageous person always benefit?
Not always. It depends on the specific type of courage and the context. Sometimes the immediate beneficiaries are those who are directly rescued or protected by a courageous act. A firefighter saving someone, for example.
Clear benefit there.
In other cases, such as with whistleblowing, the primary benefit might be to society as a whole by exposing corruption. Even if the courageous individual faces significant personal costs, losing their job, facing lawsuits, social ostracism.
Right. They might suffer personally even if society benefits.
Exactly. Many definitions of courage do link it to the pursuit of a noble good, suggesting that the intention is often to benefit others or to uphold a larger ideal. However, even when the primary beneficiaries are others, the The courageous individual often experiences intrinsic benefits, such as a stronger sense of integrity, self-worth, living authentically.
So it's often a complex mix of both individual and collective benefits, and sometimes personal costs.
Precisely. And while there can certainly be complexities and nuances, the widespread positive valuation of courage across so many different fields, philosophy, psychology, history, evolutionary biology, strongly suggests that it has indeed been beneficial for the most part, as our listener proposed. The impact of courageous actions can be both widespread and long-lasting, shaping the course of human history in profound and meaningful ways.
We've explored courage in so many different domains, facing physical danger, navigating moral dilemmas, driving societal change. But what about those really fundamental questions about the nature of existence itself? How does courage play a role in that realm? The big picture stuff.
This brings us back to the realm of existential courage, the bravery it takes to confront the inherent anxieties that come with being human. Our awareness of our own mortality, the ongoing search for meaning and purpose, the weight of our freedom to make choices, and the potential feeling of isolation. It's about making a conscious choice to live authentically in the face of these fundamental challenges.
It sounds like having the courage to grapple with the big, often unanswerable questions. Death, meaninglessness.
Exactly. Existentialist thinkers have delved deeply into this aspect of courage. Viktor Frankl, a survivor of the Holocaust, developed logotherapy based on his experiences. He believed that our primary motivation is the search for meaning.
Meaning.
And he saw immense courage in those who could find a reason to live even in the most extreme circumstances of suffering and the face of death. He emphasized our fundamental freedom to choose our attitude, regardless of our external circumstances, and that act of choosing often requires profound courage. He even spoke of as supreme meaning, a sense of ultimate purpose that might be beyond our full comprehension but can still provide solace and direction.
Finding purpose even when everything around you seems utterly meaningless, that takes incredible strength.
Precisely. Irvin Yalom, another prominent thinker, talks about 4 fundamental ultimate concerns: death, freedom, isolation, and meaninglessness.
The big fort.
Right. And he argues that living an authentic life requires the courage to confront these concerns directly. Facing our own mortality, for example, can paradoxically lead us to appreciate life more fully, to live more urgently. Rollo May focused on the courage to create, the bravery to bring new possibilities into the world, to form meaningful connections with others, even in the face of uncertainty and potential loss.
Creating meaning through action and connection.
Yes. Even the experience of grief, for example, requires the courage to confront pain and to gradually rebuild meaning in the absence of a loved one. And Hannah Arendt's political philosophy, her idea of taking responsibility for the world, also connects here. It takes existential courage to engage with the complexities and challenges of our shared existence.
So it's not just about grand acts of heroism, it's also about the everyday courage to keep going, to keep affirming life, creating meaning, connecting with others in the face of its inherent difficulties and uncertainties.
Exactly. Belief systems and faith traditions also often play a significant role in fostering this kind of courage, providing frameworks for meaning and ways to cope with existential anxieties. Even intellectual courage connects here, the bravery to challenge fundamental axioms in science or logic, to embrace potentially unsettling truths about the universe or ourselves.
What's the state of mind associated with this kind of courage? Is it just gritting your teeth?
It often involves managing feelings of anxiety, maintaining a sense of resolve, and frequently holding on to a sense of hope and self-efficacy, a belief in the chosen path or goal. But in existential courage, there's also a crucial element of accepting anxiety as an inherent and unavoidable part of the human condition, rather than trying to eliminate it completely.
Accepting the uncertainty.
Right. Ultimately, it's about making a conscious choice to live meaningfully and authentically in the face of life's fundamental uncertainties. This courage to be is foundational, not just for our individual lives, but also for our engagement with the world and with each other.
We've explored what courage is, where it comes from, and its impact. Now, let's consider the ethical dimensions more formally. Different philosophical traditions have different ways of evaluating courage, don't they? Is it always considered good?
They do indeed evaluate it differently. Virtue ethics, particularly in the tradition of Aristotle, views courage as a virtue, a fundamental aspect of a well-lived and flourishing human life, eudaimonia.
Right, part of being a good person.
Exactly. It's seen as the balanced middle ground between being cowardly and being reckless, and it's always directed towards a worthy aim or a noble cause. From a virtue ethics perspective, A courageous act is considered morally right because it's the kind of action that a virtuous person, someone with good character, would naturally perform. It's intrinsically good.
So it's intrinsically linked to good character. The act flows from the person.
Absolutely. Then we have deontology, most famously associated with Immanuel Kant. For Kant, courage is not inherently good without qualification. Its moral worth depends entirely on the goodwill behind it.
The intent.
Whether the courageous act is motivated by a sense of duty to uphold the moral law, what he called the categorical imperative. Someone might exhibit great bravery, but if their underlying intentions are flawed or if they aren't acting out of duty, the act doesn't necessarily have positive moral worth from a deontological perspective.
Well,
it might be instrumentally good if it helps fulfill a duty, but not good in itself.
it's about the underlying principle, not just the bravery of the action itself.
Precisely. And finally, consequentialism, such as utilitarianism, evaluates the morality of actions based solely on their outcomes or consequences.
Does it produce the greatest good?
Exactly. From this viewpoint, courage would be considered good if it leads to positive consequences, like saving lives or preventing harm, maximizing overall happiness or well-being. However, if a courageous act ultimately results in more harm than good, it wouldn't be considered morally right under this ethical framework, regardless of the bravery involved.
So the very same courageous act, for example, a soldier making a self-sacrificial decision in battle, could be evaluated quite differently depending on which ethical lens you're applying.
Exactly. Virtue ethics might praise it as a noble act, demonstrating courage as a virtue flowing from good character. Deontology would focus on the soldier's duty and their underlying intentions. Were they acting from a sense of moral obligation? Consequentialism would weigh the life saved against the life that was lost and other potential outcomes.
Fascinating.
Despite these differing perspectives, courage is often considered a kind of meta-virtue. As thinkers like C.S. Lewis and Maya Angelou have suggested, it's often necessary for us to be able to act on any other virtue we might hold, like justice, honesty, compassion, when we are faced with difficult or challenging circumstances, when there's risk involved.
It's like the backbone that allows us to act on our other values, even when it's hard. The form of every virtue at the testing point.
Precisely. Even if courage isn't always considered good in itself by every ethical theory, it's frequently seen as essential for leading a morally upright life. We have a table summarizing these ethical takes in our sources too.
Okay. Now, an important practical point. We also need to be careful not to mistake recklessness or foolhardiness for true courage, right? How do we tell the difference? Where's the line?
That's a very important distinction to make. Aristotle, as we discussed earlier, provides a useful framework by defining courage as the middle ground, the mean. Recklessness, in his view, is an excess, a deficiency in appropriate fear, while cowardice is an excess of fear.
Right. Too much or too little fear.
True courage, as the philosopher Daniel Putman suggests, involves a deliberate and reasoned choice to act in a fearful situation for the sake of a goal that is considered worthy. It's not impulsive. Foolhardiness is similar to recklessness. It involves an imbalance between one's confidence and the actual risks involved, often stemming from a poor assessment of the potential dangers.
So it's not simply about being fearless or charging ahead blindly.
Not at all. Wisdom and rational evaluation are key components of true courage. It involves accurately assessing the potential risks, understanding the likely outcomes, and making a reasoned decision to act because the importance of the goal outweighs the fear.
Thinking it through.
Right. Recklessness, on the other hand, is often impulsive, thoughtless, maybe driven by ego or a desire for thrills, without a careful consideration of the potential negative consequences for oneself or others.
So the motivation behind the action and the thought process involved the deliberation, the assessment of risk versus the value of the goal are crucial in separating true courage from mere recklessness or foolhardiness.
Exactly. Reason, careful deliberation, and the nature of the goal. These are the differentiating factors. Courage isn't just blind bravery, it's informed and purposeful action in the face of fear.
Now, this is where the discussion can become a bit more complex and perhaps even uncomfortable. Can courage be directed towards harmful ends? Can there be such a thing as a courageous villain, someone who is brave but evil?
This is a really challenging ethical question. Objectively speaking, someone who commits a terrible act, say a suicide bomber, might face extreme personal risk and even certain death for their cause. In that very limited, purely descriptive sense of facing danger without flinching, they might not be considered cowards.
Okay, purely descriptive.
However, from a moral standpoint, it's a very different story. Moral courage, as we've discussed it, often involves challenging the norms and values of your own group when you believe they are unjust. Individuals who commit malevolent acts are typically conforming rigidly to the ideology of their in-group, however warped that ideology might be, rather than challenging it. Their courage isn't directed at upholding broader ethical principles.
So it's a kind of twisted version of courage, bravery in service of something bad.
In many ways, yes. As Kant would argue, courage without a foundation of goodwill lacks positive moral worth. Someone might demonstrate bravery, face danger, but if their underlying intentions and actions are fundamentally evil, aimed at destruction or harm, that bravery doesn't somehow make their actions morally justifiable. This leads to the concept of bad courage or misplaced courage.
Bad courage.
The demonstration of bravery in the pursuit of harmful or immoral objectives. These individuals may genuinely believe in the nobility of their cause, however perverted that perception might be from an ethical standpoint.
And how does this relate to cruelty? Our listener mentioned that people who are cruel often don't seem to care about preserving life. Is there a connection?
Cruelty, especially sadism, is fundamentally opposed to the principles of moral courage. Sadism is characterized by taking pleasure in the suffering of others, a profound lack of empathy, and an absence of remorse or guilt for harm inflicted.
The opposite of empathy.
Exactly. These traits are the antithesis of what motivates moral courage, which is typically rooted in empathy, a sense of justice, and a desire to alleviate suffering or uphold a positive value. There are even different types of sadism described in psychology: spineless, tyrannical, enforcing, explosive, and one type, sometimes referred to as spineless sadism, actually reveals a clear lack of courage, where individuals exploit the vulnerable to feel a sense of power, precisely because they are too cowardly to confront equals.
Wow.
Any display of courage in the context of cruel acts is ultimately in the service of inflicting harm and asserting dominance, completely devoid of any moral legitimacy or noble cause. The listener's point about cruel people not caring about saving lives ties into this lack of empathy inherent in sadism.
So the psychological capacity for fearless action doesn't automatically equate to moral courage as a virtue. You can be fearless and cruel.
Precisely. The ability to act without fear, or to overcome fear, is essentially a value-neutral psychological capacity. It only becomes moral courage when it is guided by ethical intentions and directed towards morally justifiable ends, promoting well-being, justice, truth, etc. And tragically, as Hannah Arendt pointed out regarding the Holocaust, indifference and a lack of moral courage in bystanders can often create the conditions in which cruelty is allowed to flourish.
It's a sobering thought. So simply being brave isn't enough. That bravery needs to be guided by a strong moral compass. The why matters immensely.
Absolutely. The capacity for courageous action is value neutral until it is informed by our intentions, our values, and our understanding of what is right and just.
This entire discussion really underscores the complexity of courage. Now let's shift our perspective completely and consider this through the lens of artificial intelligence. How might an AI define human courage? Could it even understand it?
That's a fascinating thought experiment. An AI wouldn't have human emotions, personal experiences, consciousness, or our subjective understanding of concepts like nobility, sacrifice, meaning. Its definition of courage would necessarily be operational and data-driven.
Based on patterns.
Exactly. Based on the patterns it could identify in vast amounts of information text, maybe behavioral data if it had access. It might identify courage as a consistent pattern of behavior where an agent, in this case a human, presents in pursuing a particular goal, despite facing a high probability of negative outcomes or adversity.
Looking for keywords.
Yes. Linguistically, it would likely pick up on keywords like bravery, fear, risk, sacrifice, heroism, and analyze the context in which these words frequently appear together.
Right.
If it had access to behavioral data, it might try to model courage as the decision-making process where the perceived value of a goal, as defined by human data labels,
Right, humans telling it what's valuable.
outweighs the calculated probability and severity of potential threats. It's an algorithmic interpretation.
So a very analytical, almost mathematical definition, calculating risk versus reward.
Precisely. A hypothetical AI-generated definition might be something along the lines of courage, a statistically improbable continuation of goal-oriented behavior X in the presence of quantifiable environmental or agent-derived threat signals, threat Y threshold Z, where the anticipated reward or value of goal attainment value G, as determined by aggregated human preference data, exceeds a predefined risk-reward calculation.
Very dry, lacks the human element completely.
Totally. It would lack that internal human understanding of what it feels like to be courageous or the subjective valuation of a noble goal. AI processes information algorithmically, It reinterprets human intelligence. It doesn't replicate human consciousness or subjective experience.
It's interesting to consider that AI, by potentially automating some of our more routine or maybe even some risk-averse tasks, might inadvertently free up human beings to focus on these more uniquely human capacities like courage, creativity, empathy.
Some theorists have suggested that possibility. It's an optimistic view. However, a significant challenge for AI in defining courage would be understanding that crucial aspect of a noble goal that is so often intertwined with our human understanding of it. Nobility is a subjective, value-laden judgment.
How would an AI learn that?
An AI would require massive amounts of human-labeled data. This act was courageous because the goal was noble. And ethical programming to even begin to grasp this concept. And that process would inevitably be susceptible to encoding existing human biases present in the training data. What one culture deems noble, another might not.
So AI could potentially identify the action that we might call courageous based on risk assessment, but it would likely struggle massively with the underlying motivation, the values, and the moral dimension.
Exactly. The essence of human courage involves those subjective internal factors, our values, our beliefs, our emotional responses, our sense of meaning that are currently and perhaps fundamentally beyond the reach of artificial intelligence as we know it.
Okay, so defining it is tricky for AI. But can AI actually play a role in helping us become more courageous? That sounds a little paradoxical, maybe even sci-fi.
Well, AI can't directly instill courage in a human being. It can't give you a courage injection. It has the potential to be a valuable tool in helping us cultivate and express our own courage. Think of it as taking a more indirect approach, providing support and training.
How would that work? Examples.
Well, AI could power sophisticated simulations in virtual or augmented reality environments. Imagine firefighters practicing rescues in realistic AI-generated scenarios, or soldiers training for complex operations. You could safely practice responding to fear-inducing situations and develop more courageous responses.
Like a virtual rehearsal for a challenging real-life scenario, facing your fears in VR.
Precisely. AI-driven VR could also be utilized for exposure therapy to help individuals gradually overcome specific fears and anxieties, like fear of public speaking or phobias. AI could adapt the scenarios based on the user's real-time physiological responses. AI could also create complex and dynamic scenario-based training programs for professionals in high-risk fields, police, medical responders, providing personalized feedback to help them develop emotional resilience and cognitive agility in the face of danger.
So like a highly advanced flight simulator, but for our emotions and decision-making under pressure.
In a way, yes. AI could also act as a personalized mental skills coach. Imagine an app that helps you better understand your own emotional states, identify your fear triggers, develop effective coping mechanisms based on cognitive behavioral therapy principles.
A pocket therapist?
Sort of. It could even help you practice taking different perspectives in challenging interpersonal situations, perhaps role-playing difficult conversations to build social courage. In high-stakes operational environments, say mission control or complex surgery, AI could process vast amounts of data to enhance situational awareness, freeing up human cognitive resources to focus on making those critical and sometimes courageous decisions.
Taking some of the cognitive load off.
Right. And AI-powered tools could even prompt us to engage in self-reflection about our values and past courageous actions, potentially reinforcing our sense of self-efficacy and encouraging future bravery, like a digital journal that asks guiding questions.
That all sounds really promising, actually, useful applications. But there's also a potential downside, a risk of becoming overly reliant on these tools. Isn't there a de-skilling, maybe?
Absolutely. That's a critical concern. Over-reliance on AI for tasks and decisions that traditionally require human courage, judgment, and emotional regulation could inadvertently diminish our own capacity for it.
How so?
If we become too dependent on AI to navigate challenging situations, to manage our fears, or even to tell us what the right or brave thing to do is, we might risk losing our own sense of personal agency, our critical judgment, our moral deliberation skills, and the valuable experience of overcoming adversity through our own efforts. The muscle might atrophy if we don't use it.
So we need to be careful it doesn't become a crutch that weakens us.
It's crucial to find the right balance to utilize AI as a tool to augment our abilities, to support our growth, rather than allowing it to replace our own innate capacity for courage and moral reasoning. AI as a tool, not a master.
Our listener also wondered if AI could potentially help us achieve a state of constant well-being, where we could always feel good. Is that a realistic prospect? And is it even something we should aim for? Perpetual happiness via algorithm?
That taps into a very deep and understandable human desire, doesn't it?
Yeah,
To avoid pain and maximize pleasure. But it also raises some significant philosophical and psychological
for
questions.
sure.
AI certainly holds promise for improving various aspects of our well-being through advancements in personalized healthcare, mental health support, access to education, optimizing environments. The concept of synthetic happiness, a state of well-being facilitated or even generated by AI, is something that is being actively explored, sometimes with concern.
So AI could potentially optimize our lives to maximize our happiness levels, like recommending activities, content, maybe even interventions.
Potentially. Imagine AI curating your newsfeed to only show positive things or suggesting mood-boosting activities constantly. However, there are considerable risks associated with this idea. We've mentioned over-reliance, but also a potential weakening of genuine human connection if our interactions are constantly mediated or optimized for pleasantness, and the possibility of experiencing a less authentic, maybe shallower form of happiness.
Like living in a curated bubble.
Perhaps. Furthermore, the very notion of perpetual happiness is arguably problematic from both a philosophical and a psychological standpoint. Many argue that a life devoid of challenges, setbacks, and the full spectrum of human emotions, including sadness, anger, fear, would lack depth, meaning, and the resilience that comes precisely from overcoming adversity.
You need the lows to appreciate the highs.
Partly, yes. But also, negative emotions, while certainly unpleasant, play a vital role. They signal problems, motivate change, foster empathy, and contribute to our growth and our ability to connect with others on a deeper level. Thinkers like Arthur Brooks argue that true fulfillment involves not just pleasure, but also satisfaction derived from striving and achieving, and a sense of meaning, which often comes from confronting difficulties.
So trying to eliminate all discomfort and negative feelings might actually be detrimental in the long run, counterproductive to a meaningful life.
Exactly. Attempting to artificially maintain a constant state of positive affect might also inadvertently remove the very conditions that foster the development of crucial qualities like courage, resilience, compassion, and wisdom. How do you learn courage if you never face fear? Moreover, there are significant ethical considerations
Like what?
related to human autonomy and agency. Are we just puppets of the happiness algorithm?
Sure.
The potential for biases to be embedded in AI systems, whose definition of happiness gets prioritized, the authenticity of experience, and the fundamental value we place on struggle, growth, and genuine human experience itself.
So while AI can undoubtedly be a helpful tool for well-being, the ultimate goal shouldn't be a state of constant, artificially induced bliss. That sounds
Yeah.
dystopian.
Precisely. A more balanced and human-centered approach would likely involve using AI to help us navigate the full range of human experiences with greater resilience, understanding, self-awareness, and yes, courage, rather than trying to eliminate all sources of difficulty or discomfort, helping us cope, not escape. We have a table outlining some of these AI interventions and pitfalls in the sources.
Our listener also pondered whether AI could provide a better logic to understand the idea that life is all there is and that courage wouldn't be necessary after death. What insights might AI offer on these profound existential questions? Can logic alone solve them?
AI can certainly be a powerful pedagogical tool for exploring complex philosophical topics like existentialism. It can process and analyze vast amounts of text from different thinkers, identifying and presenting various arguments concerning the nature of life, death, meaning, consciousness.
Laying out the arguments clearly.
Yes, it could articulate the logical arguments for a purely materialistic worldview, that consciousness ends with brain death, as well as the counter-arguments from different philosophical, spiritual, and religious traditions. It could compare their logical structures.
So it can present the information, the different viewpoints, but can it truly understand it in a human way? Or offer a definitive answer?
That's the crucial distinction. Current artificial intelligence lacks consciousness, subjective experience, emotions, personal history, and self-awareness, all of which are fundamental to human existential understanding and grappling.
The lived experience.
Right. So while an AI could analyze the logical consistency of the statement that courage isn't needed after death, if death is the complete cessation of consciousness, which is almost tautological, if you don't exist, you don't need anything.
Right. Seems obvious if you accept the premise.
It fundamentally misses the deeply human experience of needing courage in the face of our own mortality. The courage it takes to live a meaningful and authentic life despite that awareness of finitude, which is the essence of existential courage. AI doesn't feel existential dread or the pull towards meaning.
So it can't really provide that deeper, empathetic understanding or offer any genuine existential solace or conviction. It can't instill belief.
Correct. AI's better logic is primarily about its capacity for processing information, identifying logical connections, and perhaps spotting inconsistencies. It's procedural. It's not about possessing experiential wisdom or the ability to grapple with existential anxieties on a human level. It can't tell you what to believe or how to live. And ironically, we're now seeing existential reflections about AI itself, the potential risks it poses, the ethical dilemmas of using AI in life and death decisions.
Yeah, the conversation is turning back on AI.
Exactly. So while AI can be a valuable tool for exploring these concepts intellectually, it cannot replace the deeply personal and human journey of grappling with existential questions or diminish our fundamental need for courage in living with the awareness of our own mortality. Logic helps, but it doesn't solve the human condition.
This naturally leads us to some significant ethical considerations surrounding the increasing influence of AI on human courage and our decision-making processes in general. What are some of the key ethical concerns we need to be mindful of as AI becomes more integrated into our lives?
There are indeed numerous important ethical implications, and they're becoming more urgent. One major concern is the potential for the erosion of human autonomy in decision-making.
Losing control.
If we become overly reliant on AI systems, particularly in complex situations that might require nuanced judgment or courageous choices, there's a risk that we might blindly follow recommendations or cede our own judgment and agency. This could lead to a diminished capacity for independent thought and courageous action. The military context, where AI is increasingly being explored for lethal autonomous weapon systems or decision support, provides a stark example of these concerns.
And we also need to be wary of the potential for bias in AI systems, right? We touched on that with defining nobility.
Absolutely. If AI algorithms are trained on data that reflects existing societal biases, racial, gender, socioeconomic, they can inadvertently perpetuate and even amplify those biases in their recommendations or predictions.
Making inequality worse.
Potentially, yes. This makes it more difficult for individuals to challenge the AI's guidance, even when those recommendations might lead to unjust or unethical outcomes. It requires even more courage to question the supposedly objective machine and the black box problem.
Where we don't know how it reached a decision.
Exactly. The decision-making processes of some advanced AI systems are opaque and difficult for humans to understand. This lack of transparency raises significant ethical concerns about our ability to trust and ethically evaluate these systems, especially in high-stakes situations like medical diagnosis, hiring, or criminal justice, where courageous judgment might be needed to override a flawed recommendation.
It's difficult to be courageous in challenging or questioning something whose reasoning you can't understand. It feels like arguing with a wall.
Precisely. And the increasing integration of AI into our decision-making processes can also blur the lines of responsibility and accountability. If an AI-influenced decision goes wrong, a self-driving car accident, a biased loan application rejection, who is ultimately to blame? The programmer, the user, the AI itself. This diffusion of responsibility can potentially discourage individuals from taking courageous stances or from being held accountable for their actions.
Passing the buck to the algorithm.
There's a growing recognition of the urgent need to embed human values and ethical considerations into the development and deployment of AI systems through codes of conduct, regulations, technical design choices. This task itself requires moral and intellectual courage from developers, policymakers, and society as a whole. But we also need to be mindful, as we discussed, of the potential de-skilling effect of over-reliance on AI, where our own capacity for courageous judgment, critical thinking, and moral reasoning might atrophy over time if we outsource too much decision-making.
So while AI offers potential benefits in various domains, its influence on human courage is complex and multifaceted, and we need to proceed with careful consideration, maybe even skepticism, regarding these ethical implications.
Absolutely. It has the potential to augment certain aspects of courage training or decision support, while simultaneously eroding the conditions like autonomy, accountability, transparency, the need for struggle that foster genuine human courageous action. There's a real paradox there. We may even need to cultivate new forms of courage specifically for the AI age.
Like what?
The courage to trust AI appropriately but not blindly, the courage to question its outputs even when they seem authoritative, the intellectual courage to understand its limitations, and the collective courage to govern its development and use responsibly before it gets out of hand.
This has been such a comprehensive and thought-provoking deep dive into courage, really covered a lot of ground. As we bring our discussion to a close, What are some of the key insights we should carry forward, especially as we navigate this evolving human AI landscape? How can we actively cultivate courage in our lives and in society?
Well, we've seen that courage is this incredibly multifaceted human quality, right? With deep evolutionary roots and profound implications for individuals and societies. Fostering courage requires conscious effort at multiple levels.
Okay.
On an individual level, it involves actively practicing courageous behaviors. Maybe starting small, building resilience to setbacks, developing effective strategies for managing our emotions, engaging in regular reflection on our core values, what really matters to us, and cultivating that hardy mindset we talked about, commitment, control, challenge, embracing difficulties as opportunities.
Practice, reflection, mindset.
Exactly. On a societal level, we need to create cultures that value and recognize diverse forms of bravery, not just the stereotypical stuff. We need to foster environments of psychological safety, particularly in workplaces and communities where individuals feel empowered to speak up, take risks, admit mistakes without fear of excessive punishment. We need to share thoughtful and nuanced narratives of courage and actively challenge societal norms like rigid gender roles that might inhibit courageous action.
Creating the right environment.
And in the realm of education, we need to prioritize the development of critical thinking skills, ethical reasoning abilities, and emotional intelligence from a young age. And as we've discussed, AI can potentially serve as a valuable pedagogical tool in these efforts. Use carefully.
And AI itself can be a partner in promoting ethical reasoning and even courageous action, if used wisely.
Yes, potentially. By providing diverse perspectives, simulating complex ethical dilemmas, helping us to clarify our own values, and aiding in more deliberative and informed decision-making processes. However, and this is a big however, it's absolutely crucial that we maintain human oversight, demand transparency and accountability in AI systems, and prioritize the development of AI that truly augments human moral agency, rather than replacing or undermining it.
Keeping humans in the loop and in charge.
Fundamentally, yes. Ultimately, as we address the core concerns raised by our listener, we've seen that courage transcends mere survival. It's about actively embracing risk in the service of higher values. The pursuit of constant AI-driven feeling good is likely neither feasible nor ultimately desirable. It's through facing challenges that we cultivate courage and discover deeper meaning.
Right.
While AI can aid our exploration of existential questions, it cannot replace the fundamental human need for courage in confronting our mortality and living authentically. Cruelty represents a perversion, a failure of moral courage, and the misuse of AI could potentially amplify harmful intentions if we're not vigilant. And finally, AI's understanding of courage will always be fundamentally data-driven, lacking the rich, subjective, value-laden experience that is central to human courage.
So courage remains essential, maybe even more so now.
I think so. Courage remains an indispensable human quality in this emerging AI age. Our central challenge lies in harnessing the power of technology to enhance human agency, ethical reasoning, and genuine well-being, while actively resisting the erosion of moral deliberation and the seductive idea of eliminating all meaningful challenge. AI can undoubtedly augment certain aspects of human endeavor, but it cannot and should not replace the human heart and mind in those courageous acts that are ultimately driven by our deepest convictions and our unwavering commitment to values such as human flourishing, justice, the pursuit of knowledge, and the search for meaning.
This has been such a deeply insightful exploration into the multifaceted nature of human courage, tracing its philosophical roots all the way to its potential interaction with the rapidly evolving field of artificial intelligence. It's clear that courage is far more than simply the absence of fear. It's a dynamic and constantly evolving virtue that is absolutely essential for navigating the complexities of life.
Indeed. And as we look towards a future that will undoubtedly be increasingly shaped by technology, it prompts us to consider what new forms of courage will become the most vital for the future of humanity.
That's a big question.
It is. The courage to disconnect, the courage to think slowly, the courage to resist algorithmic manipulation. It's a question that's certainly worth continued reflection, and hopefully the insights from our deep dive today will provide you, our listener, with some valuable food for thought as you navigate your own life and consider the broader societal landscape.
This is DigitView.